December 17th, 1944. The Ardennes forest, Belgium. German Obersturmbannführer Jochen Peiper's Kampfgruppe had just overrun an American fuel depot near Büllingen. His tanks were nearly empty after breaking through American lines. This fuel depot was a godsend, exactly what his unit desperately needed. Peiper's men secured the depot quickly. American defenders had barely fought, they fled, leaving behind everything. And what they left behind made Peiper stop and stare. 50,000 gallons of fuel just sitting there, stored in standardized jerry cans, neatly organized, properly labeled. Enough fuel to run his entire Kampfgruppe for days. More fuel in this one small depot than some German divisions received in a month. But that wasn't what shocked him. What shocked him was the realization of what this depot represented. This wasn't a major supply hub. This wasn't a strategic reserve. This was a forward supply point for one American division. A routine stockpile. And it contained more fuel than Peiper's entire SS Panzer division had been allocated for the entire Ardennes offensive. Peiper stood there, surrounded by fuel cans, and understood something that made his blood run cold. If the Americans could afford to stockpile this much fuel at a minor forward depot, if they could leave 50,000 gallons behind without even attempting to destroy it, if this was routine for them, Germany had already lost. Not was losing, had lost. The war was over. Germany just didn't know it yet. One of Peiper's officers approached. Herr Obersturmbannführer, this is a great success. We have fuel for days. Peiper looked at him and said quietly, this is not a success. This is proof of our defeat. Come. Let me show you why we cannot win this war. This is the untold story of the moment a German colonel captured exactly what he needed. And realized Germany was doomed. The fuel depot that revealed American logistical supremacy. The supplies that proved Germany's desperation was Germany's enemy's routine abundance. And the cold mathematical reality that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome strategic material bankruptcy. To understand why that fuel depot was so revealing, you need to understand Germany's fuel situation in December 1944. And the answer is catastrophic. Germany's entire war machine ran on oil. Tanks, trucks, aircraft, ships, everything needed fuel. But Germany had virtually no domestic oil production. Before the war, Germany imported oil. Once war started, those imports were cut off. Germany had three sources of oil in 1944. One, synthetic fuel plants that converted coal into gasoline and diesel. These plants were engineering marvels, but they were expensive, produced limited quantities, and were being systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. Two, the Ploiesti oil fields in Romania, Germany's only significant natural oil source. These fields produced about 90% of Germany's non-synthetic oil, but in August 1944, Romania switched sides and the fields were lost. Three, small reserves captured in occupied territories, minimal and rapidly depleted. By December 1944, Germany's fuel production had collapsed. The synthetic plants were damaged or destroyed. Romanian oil was gone. Reserves were nearly exhausted. The numbers were devastating. In 1941, Germany had produced about 60,000 tons of fuel per month. In 1944, production had dropped to about 20,000 tons per month. By December 1944, production was below 10,000 tons per month and falling. Meanwhile, Germany's military needed about 60,000 tons per month just for basic operations. The shortfall was catastrophic. Our German tank units were being paralyzed by lack of fuel. Pilots were getting minimal flight training because fuel for training aircraft didn't exist. Truck transport was breaking down because there wasn't fuel for supply vehicles. The entire Wehrmacht was grinding to a halt. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last desperate gamble, was planned with fuel shortage as the primary constraint. The operation was given exactly enough fuel to reach the Meuse River. If everything went perfectly. If the tanks encountered no resistance. If there were no detours. If every vehicle ran at maximum fuel efficiency. It was insane planning. Military operations don't work that way. But Germany had no choice. There simply wasn't more fuel. Hitler's plan explicitly counted on capturing American fuel depots. German units were ordered to seize American fuel stocks and use them to continue the advance. The operation literally planned to steal fuel from the enemy to keep going. This wasn't clever tactics. This was desperation. Germany was planning a major offensive while hoping to fuel it with captured enemy supplies. No army in history had attempted something so reckless. Jochen Peiper commanded Kampfgruppe Peiper, a battle group built around the 1st SS Panzer Regiment. About 140 tanks and self-propelled guns, plus supporting infantry and vehicles. For the Ardennes offensive, his unit received enough fuel for 80 kilometers of travel. 80 kilometers, 50 miles. That was it. The Meuse River, their objective, was 90 kilometers away. They didn't have enough fuel to reach their objective, even if they encountered zero resistance. Peiper's orders were explicit. Capture American fuel depots as you advance. Use captured fuel to continue. If you don't capture fuel, you won't make it. On December 17th, as his unit advanced, the fuel situation was already critical. They'd covered about 30 kilometers and were burning through their allocation faster than planned because they kept encountering American resistance and having to detour around obstacles. When scouts reported an American fuel depot near Büllingen, Peiper immediately altered his route to capture it. His unit needed that fuel desperately. Without it, they'd be stranded within hours. The attack on the depot was quick. American defenders were supply troops, not combat soldiers. They fled. Peiper's men secured 50,000 gallons of fuel, about 190,000 liters. For Kampfgruppe Peiper, this was salvation. Their tanks consumed about 350 liters per 100 kilometers. The captured fuel could move the entire Kampfgruppe another 100+ kilometers. They could reach the Meuse. The mission could continue. But as Peiper surveyed the captured depot, the initial relief gave way to a deeper understanding. And that understanding was devastating. The depot was organized with precision. Fuel in standardized 20-liter jerry cans, actually American copies of the German design, but improved with better handles and seals, stacked neatly on pallets, labeled clearly with contents and specifications, organized for easy access and distribution. This wasn't a hastily assembled emergency stockpile. This was routine logistics, professional, systematic, efficient. Peiper examined the paperwork in the depot office, supply records, distribution schedules, inventory logs, and what he saw made him feel sick. This depot was resupplied weekly. Weekly. Every week, American trucks brought this much fuel to this depot. This wasn't a strategic reserve built up over months. This was 1 week's supply for the units in this sector. The Americans were delivering every single week more fuel than Kampfgruppe Peiper had been allocated for the entire offensive. Peiper called his supply officer, Hauptsturmführer Arndt Fischer. Look at these records. Tell me what they mean. Fischer examined the documents. His face went pale. Herr Obersturmbannführer, if these records are accurate, the Americans are supplying this one sector with more fuel in a week than our entire Panzer Corps received for this offensive. Peiper nodded slowly. And this is not a main supply depot. This is a forward distribution point. Their main depots must have... I can't even calculate how much. Fischer looked at the stacks of jerry cans. We thought capturing 50,000 gallons was a great victory. For us, it is. We desperately needed this. But for them, this is routine. They probably have a dozen depots like this within 50 kilometers. They didn't even bother to destroy this when they retreated because replacing it is trivial for them. Peiper walked through the depot, counting cans, examining organization. He was a professional soldier, a veteran of the Eastern Front, a hard man who had seen brutal combat. But what he was seeing now disturbed him more than combat ever had. Do you understand what this means? He asked Fischer. That they have more fuel than we do? No, that is obvious. I mean the deeper implication. They have so much fuel that they can afford to leave 50,000 gallons behind without even attempting destruction. They have so much fuel that this amount is not worth the 5 minutes it would take to set it on fire. To them, this is expendable. To us, this is mission-critical supply that we had to risk our entire operation to capture. Peiper continued. They're not even trying to conserve fuel. Look at these supply records. They're running vehicles constantly, trucks moving supplies, jeeps driving everywhere. They use vehicles for everything, even short distances. We ration every liter. They waste it casually because they have unlimited supply. Fischer asked the question they were both thinking. How can we defeat an enemy with such abundance? Peiper didn't answer immediately. He walked to a stack of jerry cans and examined the markings. These cans were manufactured in Ohio, in America. They manufactured fuel cans in America, filled them with American fuel, shipped them across the Atlantic Ocean, transported them across France, stockpiled them here in Belgium, and they have so much supply capacity that losing this depot doesn't concern them. He continued, "We are fighting with captured French trucks that we have no parts for. We are rationing fuel so severely that tanks sit idle. We are converting aircraft to run on wood gas because we have no aviation fuel. And they are shipping fuel across an ocean to use in routine supply operations. The scale of their logistics is beyond anything we can match." One of Peiper's tank commanders, Obersturmführer Werner Sternebeck, joined them. He'd been supervising the refueling of tanks. "Herr Obersturmbannführer, all tanks are now refueled. We can continue the advance." Peiper nodded. "Good. But tell me, Sternebeck, how much fuel did your company tanks consume getting here?" "Approximately 15,000 liters, sir." "And how much fuel did we just capture?" "About 190,000 liters, sir." "So we consumed 15,000 liters and captured 190,000. That seems like a favorable exchange, doesn't it?" Sternebeck looked confused. "Yes, sir. Very favorable." Peiper smiled bitterly. "Now let me tell you what this means. The Americans stockpiled here at a minor forward depot, enough fuel to run all their vehicles in this sector for a week of operations. They used trucks that consumed fuel to transport this fuel here. They did this routinely every week as part of normal supply operations," he continued. "Meanwhile, we consumed most of our allocated fuel just to reach this point. We captured enough fuel to continue, yes, but we had to divert from our main route, risk combat, and spend time we don't have to capture what, for them, is routine expendable stock." Peiper gestured to the depot. "This is a tactical success for us. We needed fuel, we got fuel, but this is strategic evidence of our defeat. We are risking everything to capture what they discard casually. We are fighting on margins so thin that capturing one depot is the difference between continuing or stopping. They are fighting with margins so vast that losing this depot is irrelevant to them." Sternbeck said what they were all thinking. "Then we cannot win?" Peiper replied quietly. "We could not win the moment we started fighting enemies with 10 times our industrial capacity and unlimited resources. But I did not fully understand the scale of the disparity until I saw this depot. Now I understand. We are fighting arithmetic, and arithmetic cannot be defeated with courage or tactical skill." As Kampfgruppe Peiper moved out, now refueled and able to continue the advance, Peiper discussed the situation with his senior officers. He couldn't let the men know how hopeless he believed the situation was that would destroy morale. But his officers needed to understand. "This offensive is the last major operation Germany can mount," he told them. "After this, we will have no fuel for operations of this scale. We will be limited to defensive operations, and even those will be constrained by fuel shortages." One officer protested. "But Herr Obersturmbannführer, surely the Führer has plans for continued resistance." Peiper cut him off. "The Führer can make all the plans he wants. You cannot run tanks without fuel. You cannot fly aircraft without fuel. You cannot transport supplies without fuel. And Germany has no fuel. What we just captured represents more fuel than some German divisions will receive into the next month. That is the reality." Another officer asked, "What about the new weapons? The jets, the rockets, the wonder weapons we've been told about?" Peiper laughed bitterly. "Wonder weapons that cannot be fueled are just expensive sculptures. The Me-262 jet is a superb aircraft, but we don't have fuel for pilot training or for combat operations. We have perhaps enough fuel for a few dozen sorties. Meanwhile, the Americans have thousands of conventional aircraft, unlimited fuel for them, and they're bombing our synthetic fuel plants daily. Mathematics, gentlemen. We are losing a mathematical equation." The conversation was interrupted by a report. Another American fuel depot had been spotted ahead. Peiper ordered its capture. His unit secured it another 30,000 gallons. Again abandoned without destruction. Again routine American stockpile. As the offensive continued, Peiper's Kampfgruppe captured fuel depot after fuel depot. Each one proved the same point. American logistics were so abundant that forward depots contained more fuel than German units were allocated for entire operations. On December 19th, Peiper's unit captured a supply dump near Trois Ponts. This one had not just fuel, but food, ammunition, spare parts, and other supplies. Peiper walked through it with a growing sense of doom. The food supplies were particularly striking. Cases of rations, coffee, real coffee, not ersatz, chocolate, canned meat, cigarettes, medical supplies, everything organized, labeled, ready for distribution. One of Peiper's soldiers opened a ration box and found chocolate. He hadn't seen chocolate in 2 years. He stared at it like it was treasure. Peiper watched his men going through the American supplies with a mixture of emotions. They were delighted: food, cigarettes, coffee they hadn't seen in months or years. But Peiper saw something else: the casual abundance of an enemy that could afford to stockpile luxuries at forward positions, while Germany struggled to provide basic necessities. He pulled aside his adjutant, Untersturmführer Heinz Kremse. Look at this. The Americans stocked chocolate at forward supply points. Chocolate. Not as a special treat, as routine supply, while German soldiers receive reduced rations and no luxuries of any kind. Kremse nodded. The men are very pleased with these captured supplies, sir. Of course they are. We are starving and they are giving us food. But don't you see the larger meaning? The Americans can afford to transport chocolate across an ocean to supply their frontline troops. They can afford to leave it behind when they retreat because they know they can replace it easily. Their logistics are so abundant that luxury items are routine supply. Peiper continued. We are surviving on captured American supplies. That should tell you everything about who is winning this war. We cannot supply our own troops, so we steal from the enemy. And the enemy has so much supply that our stealing doesn't affect their operations. As December wore on and Kampfgruppe Peiper drove deeper into American lines, the fuel situation paradoxically improved. They kept capturing American fuel depots. But this success only reinforced Peiper's realization about German defeat. By December 21st, Peiper's unit had captured over 200,000 gallons of American fuel. They were running on captured supplies. Their German fuel allocation had been exhausted days ago. They were continuing the operation solely because Americans kept stockpiling fuel in places where Germans could capture it. Peiper noted this in his combat diary. We have become bandits living off plunder, not because we choose to, but because we must. Germany cannot supply its own offensive operations. We rely on capturing enemy supplies to continue. This is not the position of an army that is winning. But the captured fuel couldn't solve all problems. Peiper's Kampfgruppe was running into increasing American resistance. Supply routes behind them were being cut. The offensive was stalling not from lack of fuel, but from tactical problems. And then the fuel situation took a final ironic turn. On December 23rd, the weather cleared. American aircraft appeared. Fighter bombers, medium bombers, heavy bombers. The skies filled with American aircraft hitting German positions. Peiper's column was caught on narrow roads with no cover. American P-47 Thunderbolts attacked with bombs, rockets, and machine guns. German vehicles burned. Tanks were destroyed. Men died. Peiper couldn't call for German air support. The Luftwaffe had aircraft, but no fuel to fly them. German fighters sat on airfields, grounded because there was no aviation fuel. Meanwhile, American aircraft swarmed everywhere, hundreds of planes, obviously burning enormous quantities of aviation fuel, flying constantly, hitting any German position they could find. One of Peiper's officers, watching American aircraft dominate the skies, said bitterly, "We captured their fuel for ground vehicles, but they have unlimited fuel for their aircraft. We have nothing." Peiper watched a P-47 make another strafing run. They can afford to fly hundreds of aircraft on missions that might only destroy 1 or 2 vehicles. They can afford that inefficiency because they have unlimited fuel. We cannot fly our aircraft because we have no fuel at all. That is the difference between our situations. By December 24th, Kampfgruppe Peiper was surrounded near L'Église. They had fuel, captured American fuel, but they were cut off under constant attack and unable to continue the advance or retreat safely. Peiper assessed the situation. Plenty of captured fuel, but no route to use it. The fuel that had been salvation now sat in tanks that couldn't move without being destroyed by American aircraft or artillery. On December 26th, with ammunition running low and the situation hopeless, Peiper ordered his men to abandon vehicles and break out on foot. They left behind the tanks and captured fuel. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd captured, was abandoned. As they retreated through the snow, leaving behind millions of liters of captured fuel and dozens of tanks, Peiper reflected on the bitter irony. They'd captured more fuel than they could use, but it didn't matter because tactical reality overcame logistical success. After the Ardennes offensive collapsed, Peiper was reassigned to training and defensive operations. He never led an offensive operation again. Germany didn't have the fuel for offensive operations. In post-war interrogations, Peiper was asked about the Ardennes offensive and when he knew it would fail. His answer was revealing. I knew on December 17th when we captured the fuel depot at Büllingen, not that the offensive would fail. I suspected that from the beginning due to inadequate fuel allocation, but that Germany had already lost the war. The fuel depot showed me the scale of American logistics. We were ecstatic to capture 50,000 gallons. For them, it was 1 week's routine supply for one sector. When you are celebrating the capture of your enemy's routine expendable supplies, you are not winning. You are surviving. And survival is not victory. The interrogator asked, "Did you share this assessment with your men?" With my officers, yes. With the men, no. They needed to believe we could win. But my officers understood. We discussed it several times during the offensive. We all knew we were fighting for a lost cause. But we were soldiers. We followed orders. Another interrogator asked about the planning of the offensive. Did German High Command understand the fuel situation? Peiper replied, "They understood we had limited fuel, but I don't think they understood what that meant compared to American fuel abundance. Hitler believed that capturing fuel depots would solve the problem. He was right that we could capture American fuel. But he didn't understand that the Americans had so much fuel that our capturing it didn't affect their operations. We were salvaging crumbs from a feast," he continued. The entire offensive was based on a fallacy that we could overcome material disadvantage through tactical superiority and enemy surprise. But material disadvantage of the scale we faced cannot be overcome by tactics. The Americans had 10 times our fuel, 20 times our supply capacity, unlimited reinforcements, complete air superiority. How do you overcome that? You don't. You just die slowly. Post-war analysis confirmed Peiper's assessment. The Ardennes offensive consumed Germany's last mobile fuel reserves. After the offensive failed, German mechanized operations essentially ended. Tanks sat idle, trucks couldn't move supplies. The Wehrmacht became a static defensive force. Meanwhile, American fuel consumption continued to rise. By early 1945, the US military was using over 1 million gallons of fuel per day in Europe alone. 1 million gallons. Daily. The amount Peiper captured at Büllingen, 50,000 gallons, represented about 70 minutes of American fuel consumption. Germany's total fuel production in early 1945 was about 10,000 tons per month, equivalent to about 3 million gallons. What Germany produced in an entire month, America consumed in 3 days. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. Germany couldn't win an industrial war against an enemy with such overwhelming resource advantages. Years after the war, historians interviewed Peiper about his wartime experiences. He was asked what single moment crystallized his understanding that Germany would lose. The fuel depot at Büllingen, he answered without hesitation. I had known intellectually that Germany was in trouble, but seeing that depot, understanding what it represented, doing the calculations, that was the moment I understood with complete clarity that we had lost, not were losing, had lost. The war was over. We just hadn't stopped fighting yet. He explained, military operations are ultimately logistics. Can you supply your forces? Can you maintain operations? Can you replace losses? Can you sustain the fight? Germany couldn't. America could. That's the entire war in summary. Everything else, tactics, courage, training, weapons technology, all of it was irrelevant compared to that fundamental reality. Peiper concluded, I captured exactly what I needed, fuel for my unit. But in capturing it, I understood that Germany was doomed. Sometimes success reveals failure. That depot was the most depressing victory of my career. The story of Peiper's fuel depot capture illustrates a fundamental truth about World War II. Germany lost because it fought enemies with overwhelmingly superior resources and logistics. All the tactical brilliance, all the advanced weapons, all the fighting spirit couldn't overcome basic mathematical reality. Germany produced about 3,000 tanks per month at peak production. America produced 2,000 per month. On the surface, similar. But America also supplied Britain and the Soviet Union with tanks, had complete air superiority that Germany lacked, had unlimited fuel while Germany had none, and could sustain those production rates indefinitely while German production was collapsing under bombing. The fuel situation was even worse. America produced over 6 million barrels of oil per day. Germany produced none. All their fuel came from synthetic plants or imports. And by 1945, Those sources were nearly exhausted. You cannot win a modern mechanized war without fuel. Germany ran out of fuel. The war was over. Peiper captured 50,000 gallons and realized this immediately. Hitler never realized it, even as Berlin burned around him. That's the difference between a frontline officer who understood logistics and a dictator who believed willpower could overcome mathematics. The fuel depot at Büllingen should be remembered as more than just a tactical objective in the Battle of the Bulge. It should be remembered as the moment when a German colonel did the math and understood with perfect clarity that Germany had already lost. He captured what he needed. And in capturing it, he understood his nation was doomed. Sometimes the most depressing victories are the ones that reveal defeat.